The best part about basic cable is that once every month or so, HBO and Showtime would give you a free weekend to try to hook you into upgrading. Instead, what my brother and I would do is take VHS tapes and record our favorite movies. We wore out those VHS tapes. Sister Act 2, Newsies, Sneaker, Encino Man. But that almost didn't happen because of Sony's Betamax. Welcome to Play It Back. On Friday, Tim and I are walking through our favorite creative content of this week, but I wanted to do a deep dive today about something that happened last week. We're going to be talking about the launch of a new technology by first talking about the launch and demise of an old technology. So Apple just announced their new spatial computing headset, the Vision Pro, and there's a lot of speculation about whether or not it'll take off. Last night I was sitting around a campfire with some friends talking about whether or not this is something we would buy or whether or not it's something anybody will buy. Will Apple make us care more about VR at scale? Will they take the lion's share of the VR headset market? If you've watched this show, you know I like to look back at past campaigns for inspiration. And today, I want to talk about one of my favorite case studies of all time and a format war that has some similarities with this one, home video. Does anyone actually remember the Betamax? Probably very few of you, but in the late 70s, the Sony Betamax was embroiled in a war for dominance. That war was with JVC's VHS, or as we came to know it, and eventually forget it, videotape. Now, if you're Gen Z, you've probably never used one. Hell, some of you might not even remember what watching movies on DVD was like. But VHS tapes were a huge part of life for roughly 30 years, and that's only because they beat out Betamax, which eventually just became a nostalgic punchline. Believe it or not though, Betamax was considered a superior product to VHS, and Sony had bet heavily on its success. JVC, on the other hand, was a second mover. And they came in with a much stronger go-to-market strategy. You see, Sony thought they could just put Betamax players in all of their TVs, and that would be the end of it. They had a stranglehold on the market, or so they thought. JVC knew they were the challenger. So instead, they came in and they made their players easier to use, more lightweight, easier buttons, cheaper. But they did so while focusing on the features that people actually wanted. See, Betamax had better video quality, but with VHS, you could record twice as much video than you could with a standard Betamax tape. Now this was key to their success because people didn't just want to use the tapes to record home movies. They wanted to record Captain Ron or Under Siege or the football game. Betamax wasn't long enough to let them do that. One of the benefits VHS had from being second to market is that they got to use Betamax's launch as their focus group. If you're not first to market, your primary objective is to learn what the first mover got wrong. What did people want that they didn't get? What missed the mark? What landed? But where VHS really won was by connecting the dots. They partnered with key video hardware, technology partners, and most importantly, industry stalwarts. Most people agree that it was their partnership with the motion picture industry and the porn industry that put them over the top, although the porn piece is still debated. Getting these industries to adopt VHS as the standard for home video had a ripple effect that made it almost impossible for Sony to win. Once people knew that they could consume content, whether it was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Sex, which I just learned is a real thing, and also the laziest parody name of all time. Come on guys, it's right there in front of you. Step your game up. But once people realized that they could access this content from the safety, privacy, and comfort of their own home, there was no turning back. By the end of the 80s, VHS was the standard and Sony conceded the format war. So what were their 4 keys to success? Number 1, they built their product in-house and controlled their IP and patents. VHS bucked convention, which was licensing Sony's product like so many others had already done, and they built their own in-house. This gave them a competitive advantage. Number 2, they focused on core use cases that Betamax ignored. What did people really want? What did they need? What would get them to choose VHS over Betamax? It wasn't quality, as it turns out. It was convenience. Betamax was inconvenient, and it had a more bespoke use case. VHS was adaptable. Number 3, they focused on scale. They made the product cheaper, more approachable, and relatively unavoidable, which brings us to number 4. They leveraged partnerships to drive the right audiences. People didn't just want tapes for home movies. It was their first DVR. They wanted on-demand movies and sports when they couldn't watch live. They wanted to bring home big budget flicks that had been in theaters Sometimes they wanted to bring home porn. VHS recognized this and made sure that they were cheap and available anywhere people wanted. Okay, so fast forward to today. Do these same approaches apply to Apple? Let's talk about virtual reality. VR and AR aren't anything new. I was wearing haptic gloves at the Pacific Science Center in the early 90s, getting virtual basketballs stuck to my hand while trying to beat Gary Payton in a three-point contest because the tech wasn't that great. But as that tech has progressed, major companies like Meta, Sony, and now Apple are betting big on this hardware. Apple launched its VR headset last week at its annual WWDC developer conference. The Vision Pro, as it's called, will come with the best screen out there, an M2 chip, a spatial OS, none of this matters because all anyone has been talking about is the fact that it'll come with a nearly $4,000 price tag. Most pundits have decided that this will be prohibitive enough to keep people away, but let's look at what Apple is doing through the lens of what JVC did with videotape. Number one, built in-house. Obviously, this is Apple's whole game. They build their own products and make everyone else an outsider because they're not Apple. You're still probably arguing about why your friend has to screw up the group chat with green bubbles instead of blue. Number two, focused on value, not features. April Dunford, author of Obviously Awesome, which you should read, had a great point about their positioning. Apple calls their tech spatial computing instead of VR. VR, very hot term in this space right now. And the easy, and perhaps costly thing to do would be to shout about VR from the rooftops. If you want an example of how people are doing this, look at every software company in the world talking about AI right now. They're trying to get into that game. But Apple is already a leader in the broader tech and computing space, so they took a step back and said what we're really doing is expanding our current computing category. Apple, for any flaws, does not have an identity crisis. They know exactly who they are. The value people will get from Apple is in the computing. They're not trying to create the metaverse. They're not a gaming company. They're a computer company with great, simple hardware. And what I hear when I hear spatial computing is this will act like all of my other Apple devices, my MacBook, my iPad, my iPhone, my watch, my Apple TV. It's all trained me on their OS structure, and this one will do the same, and it'll integrate seamlessly with those other products as a result. That integration is the value I get from having all Apple products today. Ease of use, less code switching, more integrated work and play. Number three, economy of scale. Okay, let's talk about the price point. $4,000 is a lot of coin, but the headset, from my limited understanding, has a lot of expensive tech in it. And yes, this is the Pro version. That's what they released first. But take a look at Apple's other premiums. They have built an empire on getting us to adjust our concept of reasonable by associating it with an outsized value. There are smartphones you can buy today, brand new, for like $10. But how many of us still cop that new iPhone every year or two? The 14 Pro with a terabyte of data runs you $1,500. Before the iPhone, that price tag would have been unthinkable too. So when you own the market and other computer products people use, the economics change. Scale becomes about convincing people they can't live without it. And Apple has proven that they can do this better than anyone. It's Econ 101. The more of these headsets Apple is able to buy and sell, the better their margins will be, the higher the share price, and the more they can invest in making us believe that we need them. Finally, number four, meet people where they are. This ties straight back to that positioning. Apple launched this at their developer conference instead of their consumer event for a reason. They need to get the diehards on board before these are actually available, which won't be until 2024. And they need to get us acclimated to the price point and the tech itself. But I can't stress enough the advantage they have in positioning as spatial computing and connecting the way this works to all of your other Apple devices. This allows them to own the narrative, not just around VR, but holistically around the devices that you need to be productive and entertained across the board. It now fits into their broader brand narrative. Hell, even on the Vision Pro webpage, there are videos of people using the headset as their desktop monitor and keyboard, freeing up space. But don't get Apple's motivation here twisted. There's still a MacBook Air sitting on that desk. Whatever the aspirational narrative makes you feel inside, their goal is not to replace your current Apple tech. It's to add another one to the mix. We all want more gadgets and tools, and Apple has made it easy to justify that expense by giving us high quality gear, even if it's increasingly expensive. So will Apple win? Look, so much of this is contingent on VR taking hold overall. I'm still reluctant to say I'll wear a headset around while I'm packing for a trip. And the idea that you can take your Zoom meetings because it shows everyone's face feels like it misses the mark to me because they still can't see mine. But Apple will inundate us with marketing, native advertising, partnerships, influencers, journalism, earned media that will make us feel like if we want a headset, theirs is the one we want. And as they try to stay king of the hill, limiting us from using other headsets for spatial computing, that might be just as important. Regardless, it's going to be a fun race to watch. So thanks for playing this back to me. I like comparing these types of things. Anyway, go ahead and buy April Dunford's book. Obviously awesome. She's got a new one coming out too. And throw that 2-tape VHS copy of Titanic on for old time's sake. You know, if you still have a VHS player. But for the love of God, be kind and rewind. We'll see you next week.